I think the main challenges in international HR professionals face is one, the problem of scale. So as an HR professional, you are sometimes sitting in a head office and you have all these different resources scattered on all these different countries. And the question you're asking yourself is how I am going to deliver on all the things that I'm supposed to deliver on top of the things that you have to do locally. The other challenge that I normally see is understanding the different cultures that you're operating with. It's very easy to be ethnocentric or focus on your own culture, and sometimes you forget that people on the field have different realities that they're facing every day. For example, if you are sitting in the UK and in your mind you have the UK employment legislation and you're dealing with another country who has a different way of doing things, I've seen situations in which HR managers have forgotten that that's the way they think because that's the legislation they learned. And although they know there's a different way of doing things there, they just apply their thinking to the situation they're facing rather than looking at it from the local reality. So that tends to be another challenge. The third is we have lots of models in HR and tools that we take from different research and books and universities, and they come from particular places. So if we've studied models that were developing a particular culture and we try to transfer those models to other cultures or other countries, they don't always go down very well. So that's another thing that we always have to take into account. I think one of the key things that HR people have to do is to be culturally aware. If you're an international HR professional, cultural awareness is fundamental. And one of the key ways of doing this is actually going to the countries that you actually support. So let's say you've got the whole of Europe or the whole of Europe, Middle East and Africa, or a global role. You have to spend time with the local people there. Go to the country, understand what the challenges are, understand why particular leaders react to things in a particular way, if there's resistance to particular initiatives, rather than trying to say they're resisting change. That's a normal reaction when things get implemented or people don't want to do because they resist change. It might be the case, but sometimes what's really going on is that that particular way of solving that problem doesn't make sense in the context of that culture or that country. So it's going there, talking to people, making connections that allow you then to think of problems in a different way. That leads to the second element, which is flexibility. So avoid imposing your own viewpoint or these models that, as I said, you've learned somewhere else as blanket approaches that apply to everybody. I mean, they don't always work. You have to be mindful of that. You have to say there are certain things that might be universal. I mean, if you look at psychology research across the globe, some things apply to everybody, and maybe you can think, well, this might be the case. So, I mean, understanding, for example, how another person feels. Empathy is a pretty universal element. So you can think of empathy pretty much across the globe, whereas there are other elements of, for example, how you network, which is very culturally dependent. If you're doing a networking skills workshop or intervention, and you try to say, this is how you network, this is how you present yourself, that is very culturally dependent, and you can't impose that on other people. And the third thing I think is very, very important is finding and developing local resources. So you have people on the field that are actually the ones, HR people that are facing the local businesses. So it's going there, talking to them, and then once you understand, as I said earlier, what they actually, how they think and what makes sense in that place, is what the things that you can add to the picture is making sure that you can go there, develop these resources, upskill them, so then they can deliver local solutions. So for example, if you have an initiative around implementing a particular leadership workshop, and you know this workshop has, most components are standard, but some things are not going to work in certain places. You can give them the overall framework, you can go to the country, you can work with the HR team to say, this is the intention of this workshop, and let me show you how we work with a group of managers. HR observing, and then allowing them to translate it to local language and add some custom components that make sense for their reality. So that thing of finding and developing local resources, I think, is fundamental. You will find that when you're actually going to the countries and uncovering what they're doing, you find lots of best practices that have been delivered locally that other people are not aware of. And there's a lot of money and time and effort actually invested in creating those things. And it's very easy to just, for those things to just not be known or disappear or be actually totally anonymous. So what you want is those best practices to be leveraged somewhere else. You face some challenges there because some of those best practices might have been developed in a language that's not applicable somewhere else, but the concept is. So what you can is create forums in which those best practices get exchanged. We have actually use social media to allow people to post materials or to talk to each other about things they've done, or to actually post a request that will actually go to all the different HR teams in the different locations. And if somebody has done something that has to do with that, they actually connect with the other person. We have newsletters that actually, when there is a newsletter that applies to the whole region, we ask the different countries to contribute to that newsletter equally, and we ensure that there's an equal balance between headquarter content and country content. And this way others know what's going on. Also, when there is spaces like a call or a webinar or a virtual meeting, we allow space and we put it on the agenda where people actually talk about the things they're doing locally. This not only creates exchange of best practice, but also is a great way to actually give exposure to local HR talent that actually can then be developed and moved across the region. Question for the group would be, how have you managed to achieve return on investment and measure return on investment in a way that actually has impact on the business? I'm talking about initiatives like talent development, like leadership development, or any other intervention in which you can measure return on investment. How have they done it? I think the key thing when you're trying to deliver quality solutions to a business from an HR perspective is really to sit down and first understand the strategy fully. And by that I mean not just reading a strategy document, if it exists in the first place, but becoming really business savvy. If you're working in financial services, you have to understand banking. If you're working in energy, you have to understand what actually makes, how do you prospect, or how do you actually go and find energy, or how does a trader in energy think? You have to really have a very deep understanding of that. Unless you become passionate about the business you work in, you're not going to be a true business partner. The other thing is not only how that business operates in your location, but across the world, and also how you're benchmarking across your competitors. Because from an HR perspective, if you're retaining people, you have to understand how people in the same industry or other industries are thinking at the moment and where they're going. So for example, you might be in financial services, you might think that, okay, other banks can steal my talent, but a Google or an Apple or a Microsoft can come in and steal your talent because they offer attractive environments to work in. So unless that's on your radar screen, it's very difficult to do retention. If you're doing, talent management, within an organization, and you think of a bank and you think of what makes bankers tick, unless you really have a really deep understanding of how the business works, it's very difficult to do that realistically. And again, you can fall back into that tendency of applying standard template models, which maybe have nothing to do with that business. So it's really you have to understand the business and become an expert on the industry and the topic. If you change jobs every few years and you change industries, at least you need to gain a basic understanding of the industry you're joining. And I've seen HR professionals who are really good at very quickly getting to grips with the fundamentals of the business they're joining. But I think that's key. I think social media is a must. Understanding technology and social media is something that's coming. It's there. LinkedIn is everywhere. People are actually using it more and more. Lots of HR professionals are still not aware of what tools like LinkedIn can do for them from an external perspective. From an internal perspective, social media is being leveraged more and more to engage employees in terms of communication. And so for internal communication processes, social media is coming. Companies are using it internally or externally, so I think that's key. The other element that's coming in HR is I'm seeing a tendency to move away from global, expatriates and hiring more local employees. I think HR is seeing that the expat assignments are very expensive and they don't always have good return on investment. So there's a lot more localization that has its own challenges, because when you parachute somebody to another business, that creates a lot of trust. But I do think that there is more of a tendency to actually look at local talent, which creates its own challenges, because sometimes you don't have talent with the right skills. So there's another element in the future of HR, which is how do you actually create within corporations an environment of learning where you can actually have the right level of skills no matter where you are. And for example, we face situations in which there's a leader in a particular country which needs some executive coaching, but you don't have a coach in that country that can coach in local language, but you have to have a good network of providers, for example, that can source that for you, because increasingly the talent is being more local. So I think some of the things that I'm seeing happening. I think HR can have the biggest impact if it actually becomes not only a people advocate, but also advocate of the business. And it's a hard balance to strike, because I'm not saying that the interests of those two stakeholders are opposite, but I'm saying that sometimes you have to be able to be in the middle. You have to be able to understand how the business makes money and what makes the business tick, like we said earlier, but also what do people need. And the other thing I think the other way HR has to have impact is in managing flexibility in the workplace. Another tendency I'm seeing coming is people are wanting more and more flexibility in the way they do their jobs, from where they do them, the hours in which they do them, or how they sell their skills. And in developed markets, there's much more people that are actually becoming independent contractors and actually selling their time in either weeks, days, or weeks or months. And that HR has to adapt to that and understand that, and not think so much in terms of headcount, but think more in terms of skills and how you buy skills. And by understanding that, and that's an HR role, and by understanding that and managing the organizational structure around flexibility, I think that's key. So another skill that also I think HR needs is actually organizational design. I think that organizational design has been around for a while, but in an environment of increasing flexibility, especially with new generations, organizational design is fundamental.